In today's episode, I'll discuss 10 suburbs buyers agents love but investors should avoid. I've had to change my format a little bit just simply because YouTube has all these different things you have to do now, but I'll get into the contents of what we're talking about today anyway. First of all, what makes a suburb desirable? Second of all, what makes a suburb undesirable? And then finally, 10 buyers agents' favourites that in reality suck. Let's get into it. All right, so when we think of what makes a suburb desirable, what is it? So I'll come up with a couple of points here. First of all, as almost all the time I point out, strong income demographics definitely is a thing. Second of all, you'd probably want long-term capital growth, historical capital growth. And I know you get quite a lot of people that say that's not the case, but I'm going to tell you right now, with everything you do in life, you want to be able to quantify it. So that will lower your overall risk rather than just pick out of the woodwork and say, the past doesn't dictate the future. I'm telling you it does, but even for those people that don't agree with that, I can tell you right now, you're basically taking a stab at the dark if you say that. Another couple of things are raw set undersupply. So that's the set amount of supply that can come to the market. So a suburb that's landlocked obviously cannot increase in the amount of supply that is coming. Proximity to employment and business hubs along with lifestyle triangle. Also proximity to prestigious schools and institutions and demand from a wealthy demographic. That's what makes suburbs desirable. Let's look at what makes suburbs undesirable. Terrible long-term capital growth. So if you can quantify that there's been bad capital growth over the long term there, then it's probably not going to do very well in the future. Very unlikely. I don't mean for a 4 or 5 year period, because don't get me wrong, suburbs do go through slower growth phases. I mean over 10, 20, 30 year periods, something like that. Poor income demographics definitely doesn't help prices because people can't pay higher prices for properties. Poor lifestyle triangle too. No one wants to live anywhere that's a long way from work, a long way from school, and a long way from lifestyle precincts. Low or little income growth, high crime rates, high supply and oversupply, and also this is something that a lot of people don't consider, but strong demand from first home buyers isn't a good thing, or a high rate of mortgaged residents. The reason for that is because generally people with higher mortgages or first home buyers don't have as much money. Therefore, they're not very good at servicing loans when times of hardship come, like your GFCs, like your dot-com bubbles, those sorts of events. And if you look at the outer suburbs, they generally actually fell quite significantly compared to your inner, more affluent suburbs. And that's the reason for it, because of the mortgage rate and also just the leverage in general in those suburbs. So look, there's a few reasons why these sorts of suburbs are pushed, to be honest. And then, it's funny because they're not what everyone would actually think really and what they're told by the majority of people who make up fake numbers. But let's just go with a few of the reasons. First of all, they're cheap and affordable for the majority of people. Now, if you want above average results, generally you can't purchase a below average property or in a below average suburb because you're not going to achieve above average results doing so. The only circumstance where it does work is where gentrification does occur. But you need to be careful because there's a big difference between rejuvenation and gentrification. And I think about 95% of people actually get that wrong. They actually don't know the true definition of it. So also the other thing is, if it's cheap and affordable for the majority of people, you're unlikely to get people with abnormal amounts of wealth to go into those suburbs. Two other things I should mention: high gross rental yields and high depreciation. So look, gross rental yields is something, but really what you're looking for is the net yield. So I actually did a study recently and it was on Townsville versus Geelong basically. And because of your insurance rates, your council rates, and some other levies and costs being significantly higher in somewhere like Townsville or North Queensland, pretty much anywhere north of Gladstone, a rental yield basically of 4% in Geelong in terms of net yield equals about the same as a 5% yield in Townsville. Yeah, it's about a whole percent because of the holding costs, which is crazy. And also property management expenses in those areas are very high as well. I mentioned high depreciation. The reason I say that is because you're buying a property to make money, not to save on tax. They're two different things really. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. I would rather make $500,000 over 10 years rather than make $100,000 and save $300,000 in tax. You're still ending up better on top. And also the other thing is, I know, check it with your accountant, but I know in almost every circumstance I've seen, the things that you write off actually adds to your cost base. So you actually effectively do have to pay a fair percentage of that back if you ever come to sell. A few other reasons. Easy deposits, and they're sometimes even delayed. That's a good example of that is you're buying off the plan, and with that sometimes comes concessions such as stamp duty. Now, do you really think a developer's going to just give you a concession because he thinks you're a good bloke or likes you or something like that? Like, no, he's doing it because he's still making profit, but he just needs the property gone to go on in his next projects. That's the reason they do it. Another thing, kickbacks from agents and developers. So, you got some of these actual agencies that will specifically sign a agreement with some buyers agencies. So, selling agencies with buyers agencies, and they provide them all these deals. It's the same as developers, and they'll say, we'll charge you very little, but we'll give you a kickback of $20,000 or $30,000 from a developer or another agency to do so with us. So I know for a fact that some of the ones in WA, particularly in Eglinton, in Alkimos, in Baldivis, some of those suburbs, they'll kickbacks of around $30,000 to $38,000 for some agencies there. And what the buyers agents would actually say is they'd say, well, we're not charging you anything, but in fact they are charging you $38,000 just in the back door. But they don't really say that. Finally, it's wanting to make sales to pay for marketing costs. So you come across a few of these agencies that will charge, like 3 to 5% of a purchase price to buy a property. And they're like more than $20,000 for like a $450,000, $420,000 purchase or whatever it is. And that's like 5% of the asset value, 4 or 5% of the asset value or something like that. And it just doesn't make sense. And I tried to figure out why they're charging this. And the only reason I could come up with is because the marketing costs are very high, because I don't think you should charge any more than 1 to 1.5% of the asset price, in my opinion. But anyway, that's what the reasons why a lot of these suburbs are actually pushed. Let's get into some suburbs. So let's start with one. It's probably going to be the most controversial one of all of them, but it is Woodridge in Logan. So I know a lot of buyers agents and know of a lot of people who were pushing this suburb and saying, oh, in COVID it did excellent, it did so well, and it did for a couple of years, but also in the preceding 30 before that, I think it averaged like 4.2 or 4.4% or something like that. So just an awful area to buy first of all, but let's get into really why it's terrible. It's really the demographics and crime there. So obviously demographics drive markets. So if you have an area with higher demographics or disposable income, obviously people can pay more for properties. But in the case of Woodridge, you've got low demographics here, as you can see, well below the Queensland average and the national average in terms of all personal, family and household income. And then you just got crime everywhere. So this is just literally off a Google search, just Logan crime. And a lot of Woodridge actually comes up in that, funny enough. And you can see this is just like on, page 1. You can see about 10 different photos and 10 different things there. They're not really, you see, if you searched up something like, let's say, New Farm crime, you might have one photo and it's the same photo across all of the same case. This is like 15 cases literally across like the last year or two. So, I don't think it's an area where people would actually want to live. So definitely avoid that area, Woodridge in Logan. Another area that I think a lot of people should avoid is Truganina and Tarneit. And the reason for that is mass oversupply, and it's basically a mortgage belt suburb. So if you look at the bottom of this graph just here, for those who don't know where it is, it's basically West Melbourne. So you kind of exurbs or really outer suburbs of Melbourne. This is just all houses for sale in somewhere like Truganina and Tarneit, and you can see just almost in every street there's a couple houses for sale. That is not a good thing for capital growth. It is an awful thing. It doesn't work longer term because you have too much supply for the set demand, and it's mostly also only, as I've mentioned here, high sort of LVR sort of customers buying. So it's a lot of first home buyers and a lot of unknowing investors. So you'll just read here, Tarneit was home to the state's second highest number, 10,563 as listed in stress, and that's just mortgage stress households there, and that's in one suburb, which is insane. So that's another reason why you wouldn't want to buy here. That is not a good thing for long-term capital growth, so avoid it at all costs. let's get into probably the easiest one of the lot. But that's units in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane or Perth. You can add Adelaide 2 to that, and the Gold Coast as well if you really want to, CBDs. Most of them are actually lost sales and there's mass oversupply. So again, this is one of those things where a lot of unknowing investors, and particularly as well in Sydney and Melbourne, you've got your unknowing international buyers, so your overseas buyers. A lot of Chinese particularly do buy these, and they don't know that there's already another 20 to 40,000 in most cities going up in the pipeline over the next couple of years. So no good for capital growth, and no one really wants to live in these. If you're a really wealthy person, you wouldn't want to live in an apartment. You'd buy probably a 3 or 4 minimum bedroom house in a suburb close to the water in the CBD on a good block of land. You wouldn't be buying a unit if you had all the money in the world. So that's one reason. And look, you actually have lost sales. So most of Australia over the last 10 years has actually done more, like basically 100%. Most of it's actually double, not all of it, but most. And I mean, almost all these units in these areas are actually sold at a loss, which is insane considering even though Melbourne's probably been the quietest city over that period, it's still done more than 50%, in most cases 60% when you look at houses, right? And these units are selling at a loss. So that's another reason. It just doesn't work longer term. They're actually very bad investments. Like I actually met with probably about a month ago, a very intelligent lady. She worked for Goldman actually in London about 5 years ago or so. And she told me in 2014, she bought a unit in Sydney CBD for 1.3 million. Mind you could have bought Maroubra at the same time for probably the same price. And she actually got a val the other day at 1.28 million after 10 years of holding it, which is insane. But anyway, that's just an example for everyone to take. Don't buy a single unit in any of these locations. Avoid them at all costs. And if your buyer's agent tells you to buy that, sack them immediately. That's what you need to do. Let's go to probably another one where everyone's pushing, and that is Townsville. I'm going to specifically a suburb called Heatley. I didn't want to pick on the worst suburb in Townsville. I didn't want to pick the best because, I think it's fair to be probably right in the middle down there. But basically avoid Townsville at all costs. Crap area to buy, terrible long-term area to buy. But here's an example, and it just has awful capital growth over the long term. So I'm not making this up. This is... you can go and look it online. This is publicly available data. You can look here. So this is just a address in Heatley. It looks like a fairly decent dwelling. It's brick veneer, fairly solid, rentable. Like if this was in Sydney, it'd probably be worth $4 million or something like that in a good suburb. But anyway, you'll see in 93 it was 125 grand, and it was only 340 in 2023. So that's 30 years basically worth of like 3.5% growth. So it's just, awful capital growth, like really, really bad capital growth. And even if you look here, and this was only taken recently, like the median value of that's only 405 now. So even if you added like that, even, quite significant growth over last year, it's probably only like a late threes, early fours growth. So it's still awful. And this is, you might get another year of good growth out of this suburb, don't get me wrong, or maybe 1.5 to 2, maybe even. But do you really want to be holding something that does like 3 to 4% like growth? Like that's terrible. So, do I really need to say any more to these kind of people? So all the agencies, that like to discuss, oh yeah, it's a great area to buy. I made 35% in 2 years or something like that. Yeah, what are you going to make over the next 20? What, 4% every year, or 3.5%? Probably less, because it's done better than its long-term average in recency. So, longer term, generally, it reverts to its long-term averages. So you're probably going to get no growth for almost another 10 years or something like that. So something definitely to consider. Don't buy in these areas. Come to me instead. Don't buy these crap suburbs. Let's go to another one. Baldivis. I know I mentioned this in the past, and I'm going to mention it again. So I've got this as number 5, but it's oversupply presently and future oversupply. So for those that don't know, it's actually close to a few suburbs that have done very well in recent and actually long term too. So like Warnbro, Waikiki, Shoalwater, Port Kennedy, they've actually all done not too badly. But once you sort of go sort of east of that, you hit a suburb called Baldivis, and it's basically an entire new estate. And I've just put some arrows here to show you what land's there. Mind you, for anyone that hasn't been there, that is completely flat land, and a lot of these places that are actually developed where these arrows are pointing are actually farms and acreages, and that's exactly what got subdivided where the present Baldivis is, and that will be where is subdivided in the future. You've also got a suburb just south of it that's basically completely undeveloped called Carnup, and I mean, you're probably going to have, I mean, new estates everywhere there in the future too. You can already see new estates in Baldivis, so I mean, and look at all the oversupply already. So it's not a good area to buy longer term. Please avoid that 100%. So another one, and people aren't going to like this. This is just Cairns and Mackay. So, you know, a lot of people have been pushing these areas and, you know, it's done so well recently. And don't get me wrong, they've done very well in the last year. They probably do well in the next few years. But do you really want to know how well they've performed over the long term? So this is just, again, a snippet out of the Aussie Home Loans 25-year report between 93 and 2018. So for all those people pre-COVID wanting to know what things actually do without being able to throw a dartboard at Australian map and make 30%, this is what they've actually done, and this is what they'll continue to do over the long term. So you'll see here their best performers actually only done 5.6%, and like, I mean, these are their top 20. So this is like their best suburbs in the whole area. So they're like between 4 and 5% generally. So what are the average suburbs doing there? They're probably doing like 4s and late 3s, similar to Townsville. So yeah, I don't think I need to say any more about that. To give you an idea, you could have bought in Metro Sydney and Metro Melbourne within about 15, 20 Ks of CBD for the same price in the 90s, believe it or not. So yeah, and they're worth like generally over $1 million these days in most circumstances. So out for all these sorts of people. Don't buy in these areas. They are awful areas to buy. Again, any buyer's agent that's telling you to buy this, sack them immediately. Do not listen to a thing they're saying. Another one, suburb called Eglinton. So for those that don't know, Eglinton's kind of it's in the like far northern coastal region of Perth. And if you look here, the reason is, there's a couple of reasons, but the first two things are mainly your mortgage. It's a mortgage belt suburb, number one, and then secondly, it's just future oversupply. So for those that don't know, there's basically a new train line that's gone the whole way to Yanchep. It's basically the northern train line there, which is don't get me wrong, it's a good thing, right? But basically from Old Quemos to the whole way through Eglinton and the whole way to Yanchep, it's just new estate after new estate after new estate, and it's all investors and first home buyers buying there. I'm telling you right now, your wealthy Perth residents are not buying in these areas. They're buying much further south towards the CBD than this. And CBD, should I say the coastal side of the CBD more so than this area. But, you know, these areas just have ridiculous LVRs to them. Like, these areas are going to be really badly affected. And the oversupply is just ridiculous. And if you want to really know, some of these homes are actually built on under 200 meters squared. I think I came across one recently that, you know, someone I was talking to actually sent me a photo of, and I told him not to buy that, and he's actually buying in a better area now. So thank God he actually met me. But I mean, it was on 183 meters squared. It was like a 3-bedroom house. And I was like, how do you even fit that on that amount of space? But it's basically built to the edges. Some of these homes, you can't even actually push your wheelie bin out the side because it's too narrow, and they actually bring it through their either garage or front door. So they're just awful areas to buy. They'll do awful long term. So just don't buy in these areas. They're such bad areas to buy. Another one, and it's crazy to think this, but like, because there's houses in these areas that are actually, I mean, like going for, $1.5 to $1.8 million, sometimes even more. That suburb is Schofields. And when I say Schofields, I don't only mean Schofields, I mean Schofields and all surrounds. I mean Schofields, Melonbar, Tallawong, all those sorts of areas, those new estate areas, just don't touch them. They're so overpriced, number one. Like, to give you an idea, you could buy basically Elwood in Melbourne for the same price, which is oceanfront. It's an oceanfront suburb. It's right next to Albert Park. I mean, near St Kilda, close to CBD, all good jobs around there, beautiful place to live. You could buy in somewhere like probably, I don't know, like Clayfield in Brisbane, which is near all the good schools, really nice suburb, great blocks and all that kind of thing. You know, just crazy that people pay this sorts of money. And if you just look here as well, look at all the mass future oversupply too. It's already got oversupply at the moment, but I mean, you can already see a lot of those patches in new estates going up, and look at all the land around it. Some of that is on a floodplain that won't get developed, don't get me wrong, but you can see already, if you look to sort of the bottom left corner, you'll see sort of a sandy patch. That's just a new estate about to go in. So you got future mass oversupply coming in there as well. So don't buy there. It's so overpriced. You could probably buy 2 genuinely good homes for the same price as one of these. So just avoid at all costs, seriously. Let's get into another one, Caboolture and Morayfield. So that's it's basically your northern Logan. That's the way I describe it for a lot of people who are Queenslanders or don't know where Caboolture and Morayfield are. Look, again, crime and demographics. You could almost basically do the same thing as I did with Logan in terms of searching up crime on Google, but I haven't done that this time. I've actually gone on a government website in case anyone wants to debate it. So here's your just demographics on the left-hand side. So you'll see under the Queensland average completely in terms of personal, family, and household income. So that goes in ascending order from top to bottom there. And Queensland is below the national average too. So it's not as if we're saying Queensland's 50% more than national. They're actually I think it's about 5% under the national average, if I'm not mistaken. It's something like that. So it's worse than everywhere. And, look on the right-hand side there. Just look at the crime. Basically, the closer you are to the actual town centre, the more crime there is. And don't get me wrong, for most suburbs that's the case. But I'm telling you right now, if you put New Farm in here, if you put Ascot, if you put Barton, I don't know, if you put Camp Hill, you'd probably have a light yellow near the middle of town, not an absolute dark red, orange sort of colour, showing that basically every criminal basically hangs in the town. So just don't buy in these areas. They're awful long term. Don't get me wrong, you probably, for the price of, if you wanted to get into Queensland, you probably can't afford to get into Brisbane for the same price as you can Caboolture or Morayfield, but there are options elsewhere. So a good example would be Geelong. You could buy probably, up there with Geelong's best suburbs for that, and that will do 8 and 9% long term, sometimes even more if you buy on the right street, sometimes approaching 10 for the same price. So where do you want to park your money? Somewhere that does 5.5% long term, or somewhere that does 9? There's no questions about that. So again, don't buy in any of these areas. They're awful areas to buy. Let's just get into another one, and I don't understand why anyone actually buys here, but it's, people fall for this nonsense as well, but it's any major mining town. There's basically no consistency, awful long-term growth, and good examples of these are Port Hedland, Tom Price, Gladstone, and Gloucester. So I haven't only basically stuck to WA and Queensland there. I've actually given you, I forgot Surat in there as well. I've actually given you a place in New South Wales in Gloucester. So Gloucester's basically one of the towns where a lot of the miners live. So it's kind of in that Hunter Basin region. Another one, I guess, if you want to have a look, it might be Muswellbrook. So it's right up in the sort of Hunter region. Those are both good examples, but this is what can happen longer term. So this is an example of Port Hedland. So you can see in the early 2010s just how high the prices got. They actually got to over $1 million, and it dropped right down to $500,000 unbelievably within a couple of years. And that's because basically the whole town is run by mining and resources. So don't get me wrong, it's picked back up a little bit. But if you consider you could have bought in a lot of the major centres at the same time, and they were consistently done, they probably would have done 100 to 120% depending on where you buy. You're really doing badly here, because these have actually gone down about, depending on what you look at, about anywhere from about 30 to about 50% depending on what time you bought. So it's just not a good area to buy. So really don't buy in any major mining town. And also your property management expenses, just have a look if you don't believe me for these areas. They're 12 to 15% per year. So if you look at a gross rent of, let's say, $1,000 a week, take off $120 to $150 just to manage it. And that's not including maintenance costs or anything else, insurances. That's just pure the management monthly fee of your rent. So just consider that too. But anyway, we're getting to the end of this video. So look, first of all, I want to thank everyone for watching this. And look, I know I've gone on a bit of a tangent. It's not been my normal video, but look, if you really want to invest like we do and like the way I do, let's invest like the 1%. So there's contact details all here. Feel free to reach out, and you can 100% book me for just a free consult. It goes for about half an hour, just via www.compoundinvest.com.au. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day. See ya.